Good morning. So sometimes in the church, I think we have an interesting disposition towards celebrating things. And Josh alluded to this morning, and I want to kind of capitalize on it as a way to enter into this theme. We're celebrating the birth of someone who theoretically is forgettable. John's parents were very old. John's parents had been barren for the entirety of their relationship. So Elizabeth eventually conceives. And John is then born into this world. So we're celebrating today is the fact that he was just born. A birth. And sometimes I think we look at these things and we're like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Like, it happened to me too. It's great. Like, why are we making such a big deal out of this? But the responsorial psalm I actually think gives great insight into what our disposition towards our birth needs to be. And frankly, I think we really do a really bad job of it. The response is this: I praise you, for I am wonderfully made. What if every morning we woke up and said that verbally in the mirror to ourselves and recognized that we are nothing but a gift? That we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And John, this character who theoretically should have never existed, but in God's divine providence and through God's perfect blessing enters into the world. And we're celebrating that. Like, he was born in a way and at a time with a very specific purpose. That's where we're going. What's John's purpose? What's to speak? As I was reflecting on this, I was moved by his mother. His mother breaks the mold and says something that no one in their right mind would have thought she would have ever said. No, he will be called John. This was contrary to all the norms during this time. So his mother speaks a difficult truth that they, meaning the audience, would have never thought of and did not want to accept. There's no one among your relatives who has this name. You can hear the condescension, right? You can hear the lack of receptivity of this truth that she's spoken. But she knows the truth and she speaks it because what John is called to after he's born is to proclaim difficult truths. Like, think of all the crazy things that came out of his mouth that actually were not crazy, but were a prophetic way of preparing the hearts of those who were around him so that ultimately these people could receive the truth of Jesus. They could receive the truth himself. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as the saying goes. So before John's born, his mother shows him that difficult truths can be spoken. And in one sense, prophetically, this is his way of entering into the world by receiving a name that should have never been his name, should have never been spoken as his. And so just a few questions I want to offer to you to reflect on throughout the course of today in light of what we're celebrating, the fact that John was born, and he was born with a purpose, and he was born with the purpose to speak, to use his lips and his breath, to speak difficult truths to people so that ultimately they could come to know the truth himself. The first is this: like, you and I are going to die someday, and we're going to stand before God, and we're going to look at everything that we ever said throughout the course of our life, like every word that passed from these lips. Oh. And so the question I offer to you first is, what have I submitted to speak that's been difficult, that the Lord has invited me to speak, that through speaking with my lips and my tongue has been a blessing to those around me, even if that truth is the most difficult thing to proclaim with my breath and with my lips? The second thing, on the flip side, is what is it that I have not submitted to speak that's been difficult, that our Lord's wanted me to speak, but I've said, no, I can't say that. I can't say that. That's too hard. And I'm going to get rejected. I'm not going to be loved. I'm not going to be seen. I'm not going to be heard by those around me. Benedict has a great line in his book, Jesus of Nazareth. He says, a prophet is called to speak the truth regardless of the outcome. Man, in America, we're all about results. It's all about the results. And when you look at John's life, like, is he really that successful? Like, he gets his head chopped off and dies with no one around him. By our American worldly standards, he is an absolute, utter failure. But what he did is he fulfilled the Lord's mission that was given to him personally to speak difficult truths, so that when Jesus entered in and said things that they had never heard before, they'd be like, oh my gosh, these things that our Lord's speaking sounds like this other character who's no longer with us, but it echoes and actually fulfills the things that John spoke, so that this is more whole than what John said, not because what John was saying was wrong. It just wasn't the fulfillment yet, because it wasn't the Lord's lips themselves. Last question I have to give you, just to ponder today. As you know, providentially, the Lord puts people in our lives that we're called to speak difficult truths to. And sometimes those people will never, ever thank us for speaking those truths to them on this side of eternity. But think of the moment, and I know in eternity there's no time, but for the lack of clarification of what we can use verbally and speak about it, in the moment on the other side of eternity, when we get to that place with our Lord, and these people recognize the gift of the truth that we spoke to them, and they say, thank you. In the moment, I didn't recognize that it was Jesus speaking to me in and through you. I couldn't. But now that I see him and recognize the truths that he speaks to me now, I recognize him in and through you. And you've prophetically spoke to me in a way that I did not want to hear. I never wanted to hear that. But you shattered a wall that was surrounding my heart, and I was reluctant in the moment, or maybe I outright rejected you and what you had to say, the truth of Jesus. But it was the first crack in the barrier that disabled me from ever receiving our Lord. And those words that you spoke, were the beginning of the conversions that I could accept the truth himself, Jesus Christ. Like, think of that moment. Like, your lips, my lips, John's lips, are invited to speak difficult truths, gently, submissively to the Lord, with tenderness and love and kindness. But they pierce, like they cut, right? Words cut so deep, because they're supposed to. They have so much meaning and value. John was born. He is good. And he was invited to speak truths that ultimately changed people's hearts to submit to Jesus. All those things can be said about you and me as well.